Back in the late 1800s, Shell City was an agricultural boomtown. How could a mainline community be so instrumental in the Hubbard Prairie development and yet be one of the first to disappear?
Shell City started as a result of the Shell Prairies. If you want to go just north of Wadena County here, there are 3 natural grasslands. They call them Shell Prairies 1, 2, and 3, but each one has basically taken up its own name. Where Shell City was, that's called Hubbard Prairie. That was roughly 56 square miles of open natural grassland. And so the settlers would go in there and look at, say, that's easier to break than it is to sit there and start trying to dig out 3-foot, 4-foot wide stumps.
There was a Joseph Soames that was born in Canada, and he was into Minnesota in 1853. He started venturing north. He was a surveyor, a timber cruiser, a logger, an adventurer. He was the one that went into Shell City before it developed and thought this was a great place, that it would be developing before too long. In 1879, there were people from Iowa. A lot of people were Civil War vets that wanted to come up, so there was a wagon master named William Kindred that brought the first wagon trains up from Iowa.
When Kindred went in, settled at Shell City, didn't plot anything, but he owned the land there. He established, there was a hotel, they established a post office, and they had a mercantile store. Here we have a natural grassland, good for wheat. In 1879, they started constructing, not a road, a trail from Verndale all the way up, and then it angled up into Shell City and onto the Hubbard Prairie. Then this became the route that they used to bring the wheat down from the prairies. The wheat trail was very, very rough. It was never a well laid out road. And then in 1880, he sold his land to a Francis M. Yoder and Seawood Chandler. They bought the land from Kindred. They went in, had it plotted, and changed the name then to Shell City. Right in the beginning of 1880, it was called Kindred. And then when they changed the name of the town, Shell City, in 1881, then the post office became known as Shell City. There were a couple hotels in there. H.B. Morrison, who was out of Motley, he had a hotel or a store up there. There was a Stonebaugh who had a blacksmith shop. A Robinson had a blacksmith shop. There was a newspaper office. James Billings came up from Nebraska, put in the Northern Spy. At its peak, there were probably maybe 75 people, and that was about 1885. They would farm in the summertime, but then they would go work in the logging camps in the winter. That's where they really made their cash off. You know, they had cash they could spend.
With wagons, with horses, with hand and hard work and the sickness at that time, the weather was very cold. They weren't sure what the weather would be. They had many illnesses and hardships that they had to deal with, so times were very hard. Plus the mosquitoes were very, very bad. Just many of the conditions, but the early hard-working people started in those areas and they just moved north.
The demise, basically, I look at it this way, there were 4 reasons. The first one, and probably the biggest one, was the construction of the K-line, which was a spur of the Great Northern Railroad. Coming north, started down in Sauk Center and worked its way north. In 1896, it was in Walker. By 1898, it was over into Cass Lake. That started shifting interest that way. The mail contracts were let to the railroads. Then the town slowly vanished. The other thing was logging. This area had been pretty well logged through by the 1890s.
Francis Marion Yoder, they moved. They just left the area. William Kindred left the area. There was a lot of sickness at that time too, and sometimes their wives or family members would pass away and they'd want to move, you know, to a different start. A lot of them were adventurers. You know, you've gotten somewhere, you've settled it, and you want to move on to the next and exciting new places.
When these people finally moved, they tore everything down. lumber and everything. They took it and took the lumber with them. They just didn't leave it there to rot. The Yoder Hotel was torn down, moved to Monaga, rebuilt. Yoder rebuilt his house using that lumber. Then from Monaga, he moved to Fargo, tore down the house again, and moved the house to Fargo. And the house, the lumber that came out of the Yoder Hotel is still a house today in Fargo, North Dakota.
Well, this is 2nd Street, and this was also used as part of the wheat trail. As they cross, it angles down this way and then cuts north again, and then heads on out to the Hubbard Prairies.
Right now, that land is owned by the state. I'd love to see the state turn that over, at least the part that Shell City sits on, and allow that to be preserved. The holes are still visible.
Well, this is probably one of the walls of Carson's Hotel.
Frank Mitchell and I went up there, and a friend of his, and we put in signs to mark some of the buildings. We've cut the brush around some of the holes. We've cut the brush along the streets of Shell City and make it a little bit easier and more accessible for people.
This is crock pot from the early probably 1900s, 1890, somewhere in there, I'm not sure.
I think the people would have still eventually come, whether the logging industry, but Shell City provided a base for a lot of these people. It provided them with a closer market of getting the commodities and the things they needed in order to survive up here.